Hey Raj, thanks for joining the GigaOm CEO Speaks podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Ben. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So I always like to start with your background, Raj. Tell us a little bit about your founder background. I know you've done this a couple times, so I'm sure you have plenty of stories, but maybe start from the beginning and tell us about, how you got to where you are now, and some of the bumps along the way, and also some of the things you learned and had to persevere through. That's always interesting to talk about.
Absolutely. But the beginning is a long time ago, Ben. So, but no,
In startup years, yes. In startup
yes,
years, yes.
exactly.
You're
Well,
you're, you're 1,500 years old.
exactly. I'm getting very old. So, no, I've been founding and running companies since school. So since I was in college, and it's a passion of mine. So building businesses, finding opportunities, building companies around them, seeing if we can solve a problem in the market, help people, change a market. That's sort of what drives me. And I've been very fortunate to be a part of a number of companies that we co-founded with a bunch of other great people, and hopefully changed up some different markets, built some really interesting technology, built a lot of relationships, helped a lot of people hopefully grow their careers, and go on to start other companies or go on to do great things. So I'd say just the passion is to go build something really interesting and hopefully impactful. That's been sort of my journey at the very highest level.
Nice. What was the first inclination you had that, hey, like I want to try my way at doing this entrepreneur thing? Was it something that you kind of had a role model, or you always wanted to do this, or you kind of just fell into it, right? Curious what your
Yeah.
first experience was.
No, it's great question. Actually, super important question, I think, because people fall into it different ways, especially if you're a founder like you are as well. So I would say that when I was in college, I did internships at Intel, and Intel at the time was still a very, very big company. And what I quickly learned during the internships was that super interesting, great place to be, amazing company, very successful, super prestigious place to have a job, all of that. But what I figured out is you're just not, as a young person, going to get a lot of responsibility. You're not going to be able to kind of grow. And at the time, which is a very long time ago, it was like you had to put in the time to get to the next level, to have more span of control, to have more impact, to have more things that you're kind of focused on doing or being tasked to do. And I was like, I feel like I can do more, right? I want to do more. I want to grow faster. I want to be able to have more impact. And ultimately I looked around and said, gosh, well, if this is the way corporate America works, or the corporate world works, gosh, I'm not going to make it very far in the time frame that I want to make it. So, maybe the best path is I start my own thing, and we build a company, and then you can kind of start out and go try your hand at it. And the first company we started was out of school, ended up going public, and so we kind of hit that time of learning and growth of doing a startup and building it into something. So that's kind of how the journey started. Very much just a very personal, I felt like I could do more, and this was a vehicle to being able to do more.
Yeah, it's a great example, and I had a very similar experience. I started in healthcare. I had a biology degree. I wanted to do some really cool and interesting things in biotech and healthcare, but I would need an MD and a PhD and wait 20 years and then be able to do interesting things. Because you just need that institutional knowledge, you need that experience to do that. So then I went over to tech and said, oh, actually, you need zero experience, which is a good thing and a bad thing.
Yep.
But then you kind of can cut your teeth and kind of build your own way. So I think that's the thing that I hear actually from a lot of entrepreneurs and CEOs is either didn't like the way that it was done and I had some better ideas and I couldn't fix it in my role, or I just wanted to move faster and wanted to just go after the opportunity. Sounds like you had a good exit with the first one though. Not every founder I talked to has an IPO as their first company. So what was that company? What did you learn in that one that you've now kind of brought to the next couple companies? And tell us about kind of what spaces have you been in? Have you been in security the whole time? Have you been in other
Yeah.
spaces? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I've been very interested in sort of internet infrastructure, if you want to call it that, or internet infrastructure software. So kind of the plumbing of the internet was much more interesting to me, and very much probably selling into IT or ops people. That's kind of been my passion. So like if you said, hey, go build a consumer app or a gaming solution, I wouldn't know the first place to start. So definitely not my thing. But when it came to trying to figure out like how could I help corporations think about, you know, their infrastructure and how do we make it better or build different technology that would help them be more successful, that's something that I was super passionate about. So areas like security, performance, you know, DevOps type tools, those were all sort of the areas that I was very interested in and kind of resonated with my brain in terms of, you know, how can I help? And, you know, I'd say Jumpcloud's a good example of that, where we're focused on helping IT folks and security folks and ops folks. And that's kind of been the passion and kind of the energy that I've brought to kind of the space, if you will.
Nice. So do you have an infrastructure, performance, security ops background, or it's that you've always just kind of been in the market with those solutions?
Yeah, I didn't really have a background in it other than, you know, kind of learning. The first company that we did was a website usage analysis or performance company. So kind of got into it that way and then started, you know, kind of peeling back the onion. I do have a technical degree, but I mean, the degree is in electrical engineering, not in software or infrastructure or all the things that, you know, we're now looking at now. And I'm not nearly as technical as obviously the team and the folks that we have around. But, you know, you start to talk to people and you start to understand kind of what are some of the problems that they face. And if you can sort of be that translation of, you know, hey, this is what we think people need to solve problems or be successful in their roles or at their organization. And how can we translate that into, let's build something that could help them, you know, solve that problem. And by the way, we think that a whole bunch of other people have that problem too. So it's a scalable problem that we can go sell to a whole bunch of people. I think there's a lot of magic there. And that's where you see a lot of founders being super successful because they're able to synthesize a problem that they see and then they understand what the solution should be. And they've got a unique take on that solution. And then they get it out to market and, you know, try and have a lot of success with it. But And that's also the fun part, right? Because you've got many people out there who are able to do that, and they take a look at the same problem and have 5 different or 10 different ways of how to solve that problem. And, you know, that's sort of where competition comes in. It's where the exciting part of like, why is what you're doing interesting or can be more helpful than maybe some other path to solving that same problem.
Yeah. And that's also what people call a pivot, an MVP, right?
Yeah.
We've gone through 4 pivots here at GigaOm.
Wow.
2 big pivots, but 2 small pivots, right?
Yep.
The first one was a media pivot from media to research.
Sure.
And then, you know, research to strategy. Those are the 2 big pivots, and there's a bunch of product pivots in between that. I noticed that you are also an author and you have a startup playbook. Tell us a little bit about the playbook and maybe put your experience in the context of that. Like, how do you think about starting companies? How do you think about, you know, building MVPs to your point and working with customers? You know, feel free to use the Jumpcloud experience or another one as to how you actually make that first step to go from literally nothing to having a product and getting your first customer to getting your first 10 customers, your first 100 customers. There's challenges in each of those different stages.
Yeah. And actually, so the startup playbook is actually, for what you just described, a really great book for people to go take a look at. It was totally meant to be a compendium of all this experience and knowledge that my co-author Will Herman and I had of being asked a ton of questions in mentorship calls or in meetings where, you know, founders are like, hey, how do we get going? So kind of the questions of like, how do I have co-founders? How do we split equity? How do we go get our first few customers? And, you know, all those things. So we created, outside of this, the basics of how do you come together, form a company, how do you split equity, how do you assign roles, things like that. We go through kind of those foundational things. Then we went into what we called sort of the vetting loop, which is basically, you know, how do you have this concept or an idea that's unique in the market? And then how do you go test whether it truly is unique? And then how do you make sure that once you figured something out that you're able to go execute on it? You build a team around it, you fund it, you get the right pricing and packaging. So, a good example, like you said, use an example. Jumpcloud's a great example. We had this concept that, we believed that Active Directory, which was a core part of, the infrastructure for a lot of people from an identity and device management perspective, was antiquated, and we felt like a new cloud-based directory platform would be really important. Identity and device management platform would be super, super interesting. From the cloud, a different business model to execute on it. So we started talking to a lot of people, right? So, we talked to them. We said, hey, is this really interesting? And of course, when you talk to your friends and stuff like that, they all say it's interesting, right? So you got to get out of your friend group. And then one of the interesting things that we did is we started using Google AdWords. So we put ads up on Google and said, hey, would you be interested in this, basically? And so we ran a bunch of different ads, and we had white papers against those ads. So we could see how many people were downloading them. And then at the end of those, we would say, hey, would you be open for a phone call? And then we would start to talk to people that we didn't now know. So it cost a little bit of money, but not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things to go vet whether this was truly an interesting problem to go solve or not. And then you get going, right? Because you start to talk to people that you don't have this personal relationship with, who are going to be probably, hopefully, a little bit more honest with you about, it's, nice idea, it's not going to work, or, hey, this would be more interesting, or this is less interesting to me, or if you positioned it this way, it would actually be more compelling to me. And you want to charge how much for it? Like if you charge this much, it would be interesting, or or if you charged in this way, it would be interesting. And those are all the conversations you want to have. And I'd say, if you take anything out of that book, it would be like, go talk to a ton of people, right? Talk to customers, talk to advisors, talk to other founders, talk to everybody you can, and just learn. You just, the collective wisdom is so much greater than just the, knowledge and information that you have. So you want to learn as fast as possible, and that's the quickest way to do it.
Yeah, and then the secret sauce, to your point, is being able to synthesize and figure out which way to go, right? You're at a place where you could take 24 different exits.
Yes.
Which exit do you take?
Yeah.
Knowing that some of those exits actually are interwoven to the other exits. So even though you go down one path, you might end up on another path, right?
And hopefully that's some of the ones that you pick are the ones that are not dead end, right? That you can kind of jump from one path to another path. And look, I mean, there's a lot of luck, I would say, involved in the whole process too. I know people don't really like to talk about it that way, but I absolutely believe, look, lucky, right time. You made some decisions very early on that turned out to be really interesting. And you never knew at the time that these would be the right decisions or not. And they just happened to work out. And, you look back and say that might've been a catalyst. And if we would have taken a different path, oh man, maybe the thing wouldn't have worked. And you just don't know that. But I think you get lucky on those 24 paths that you talked about. You get lucky and maybe you picked one or two that are the right ones. And look, if you picked 5 or 6 that weren't, but you were able to jump on, other things that were pretty quickly, then you're probably fine, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's about moving quickly. To your point earlier, like you started a business because you actually wanted to move quicker and solve a problem faster. That is the demand on a founder, right? You have to be constantly aware of the 100 opportunities and the trends, but you got to be quick. If you make a bad decision, you got to figure out which path to go back down, or what change to make. So okay, all right. Well, Raj, why don't you tell us a little bit about Jumpcloud? Tell us about the kind of founding story of that, with the context of all the stuff we talked about, and what you're excited about with customers.
Yeah, thanks. No, I appreciate giving us some time to talk about Jumpcloud. So we started the company probably about a little bit over 10 years ago. Really, the concept was we believed that a next generation identity and device management platform was needed. So, we looked at the world and said, boy, everybody out there's got Active Directory, which made a lot of sense because everything was kind of on-prem, Windows-based, but the world was changing, right? We felt like cloud was becoming much more prevalent, and AWS was becoming pretty big. GWS now, Google Workspace, Google Apps at the time was, pretty hot. And, SaaS apps were growing like crazy. And by the way, Mac devices were starting to become in vogue. And then we, we think that mobile phones have been around forever. They haven't. So, mobile phones were becoming much more prominent, and people were traveling more. Wi-Fi was a thing, which, people can't even remember when Wi-Fi wasn't a thing, but there was a time when we all plugged in. So all this change was really interesting. And we said, boy, how are you going to connect people to the IT resources that they need? Those aren't all in the office. They're not in a server closet that you control. They're all over the world. People are all over the world. And, how are you going to do that? And by the way, all the devices they're using are, all different things. There's Linux devices, Mac devices, there's iOS, Android, there's all this stuff. So how do you stitch all this together so that a company can function, an organization can function? And what do I mean by that? Well, those people need to be able to get access to those things, do their work. I mean, their job isn't to live in IT. Their job is to go get marketing done or sales done or, development done, whatever it is, or manufacturing done. And so how do we help them stitch all of that together and give people just secure, frictionless access to whatever they need? So they come in, they log in the day, however they log in, and, they're able to go get their work done. And they don't think about all that, but the IT team is able to go make that happen in a really easy way. And they're able to make sure it's secure. So that's really what the vision of Jumpcloud was we wanted to, we have the saying, make work happen. We wanted to make work happen for people. We wanted to make those teams productive with technology. That's essentially what Jumpcloud's trying to do.
Got it. And if you're going back about 10 years, now we're going back to 2015, there were a lot of other companies who were also founding identity companies. So
yeah,
there were a lot of different founders trying to figure out which route to go down and which exit to take. Yeah. What was the exit that you guys took that got you your first couple of customers, and what was the feedback that you got as you kind of started to build out the company versus other companies like an Okta, for example, right? Yeah. That everybody knows about too, because there's a ton of different technologies now, 10 years later, right? So what's kind of changed since then, and also what hasn't changed? I think that's always interesting.
A super interesting market, right? So there was an explosion of all of these companies at that time, 2013, 14, 15, 16. And it was really interesting. It went through this wave and you're kind of narrowed down to probably 3 kind of core players, of which we're one of them. And I think that the path that we took that was super interesting is we said, we are going to be a core identity provider. We are going to be the core tool that you use to grant, modify, delete access to just about everything out there, whether that's, your server infrastructure, your device infrastructure, people's laptops, desktops, your, app infrastructure, whether that's on-prem apps or cloud-based apps, homegrown apps or SaaS applications. We're going to make sure people can work remotely. We're going to make sure they can work off of whatever device they want to work off of. That's the path that we took. And I think that's a core part of why we won in that market. And then, to your example, Okta's done very well. And I think the path that they took was they're going to sit on top of AD. So their idea was, we think very, very large companies in the world are not going to get off of Active Directory, but they're going to need to access a whole bunch of web-based applications. So we'll build this technology that sits on top of AD for these very large enterprises, and we'll connect them to that. And we'll do that better than what we think Microsoft will do. And they've obviously done very well. We took a very different path. So we have a lot of customers that use us with Okta. So there's a lot of sort of joint opportunities there. And that's good for both of us. And there's a lot of people where we compete. But I would say, the customer has a choice of kind of, do we want to be open in an open infrastructure, use whatever you want, or do we want to go down the Microsoft path where you're really tied into AD and Entra and you're a Windows first, Azure first kind of solution, or are you more open? That's kind of our positioning in the market.
So that was the off ramp that you took, right? Was the everyone has Microsoft. There's a lot of other things other than Microsoft now. That was the tipping point, it sounds like, for you. So what were some of the first conversations you had with customers about that? They're like, I'm on this thing.
Yeah.
I may or may not want to get off, because they may or may not want to tell you they want to get off.
Exactly. Yeah.
But what was that conversation like? And what were the challenges you had, and then how did you guys persevere through that? Because you're going from everybody knows this thing and everyone's trained their staff and everyone knows how to do it, and it's just the thing that everyone does, to now you have to change the way that you do business. To your point, and identity is so critical
Yep.
to managing security that it's like it's number one on the list of things you have to buy to get going on security, right? So maybe talk a little
which
bit about what that
we're gonna
offering
come
was.
back to that statement,
Yeah.
because I'm not sure that everybody agrees with that statement, which is a really powerful thing for us to talk about, and we can come back to that. But very early on, you're right. There's this company. We were at the time based out of Boulder, Colorado. You got a few people. You're working on this thing called identity. That's super important. You've got the keys to the kingdom, if you will, for an organization. Why are you going to help us? Well, the types of customers that we talked to fell into a couple of different camps. One was they didn't have anything. So they were startups, digital tech companies. They were using
Right.
Google and they were using AWS, but they didn't have Active Directory. They didn't have people on-prem. Super easy. We had a solution for them. We're cloud-based directory. We can stitch all of that together for you. And we were able to do that, and we grew really fast there. Then you've got people in the middle who were like, oh boy, we've got AD. We're tied to AD. It's a core pillar of our infrastructure. But, this thing called the cloud, all these different types of devices, all this stuff we're interested in, we really want to take advantage of that. Can you extend AD to be able to do that? So we had an offering that did that. And then you've got people who are on AD and said, wow, we really want to move to the cloud. We're excited about being all in on the cloud. It's going to be better for us, more secure, safer, more flexible. It's got a lot of benefits. We're ready for that plunge, and we're going to migrate. So we had a whole offering there as well. And interestingly enough, very early on, when I told you that we tested these white papers, those were 3 out of probably 5 or 6 of the kind of stories that we tested, which was you had nothing. It's greenfield, if you will, or we have something and we want to extend it, or we have something and we want to migrate. And we got good receptivity. And so obviously the challenge for us was that's a lot of space to cover. That's a lot of technology to go build. But we knew that we had to solve that problem for customers, because they're going to be on various parts of that journey. And that journey, I think we talk now about, a few years later, we sort of think of it as identity transformation. And just like we had, digital transformation, we've had data center transformations, we've had all these kinds of, transformations. Well, there's going to be an identity transformation too that's going to happen, right? And identity stuff has exploded. There's all kinds of identities everywhere. You've got all kinds of directory services, if you will, all around your organization. How are you going to rationalize all that? And I think that's a core problem where, larger and larger companies now are starting to grapple with. And then you have this whole thing on top of it, which is super scary, which is, your identity now is the gateway to being compromised, right? It is the one thing that people can use to compromise you as fast as that's the fastest way, right? So that's where, this gets really, really, complicated and interesting and super important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think to just kind of roll back a minute or two, I think that is where most founders find their sweet spot, right? Is the spot where the big vendor isn't, right? And that's, for your example, startups, right? Startups were brand new, they didn't have a lot of legacy infrastructure. For us as a GigaOm, it was about working with new innovators, right? So the companies that didn't exist a couple of years ago, because they needed to be evaluated, they needed to have a strategy, they needed to work with end users, and so that's always where startups find their cut their teeth. It's much harder to go to a large enterprise and have them as a design partner. It can be a positive experience, but it can also lead you down the path of building a technology for one company.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't want to be, at least we didn't want to be, I shouldn't speak to this generally. I'll speak to it just from our perspective. We didn't want to be an outsourced development shop for a very large enterprise. And what's fascinating to me is, in the intervening time that we've been around and we've been working really hard at solving this problem, you've seen our customers grow from, small little organization startups to become public companies, and to some being very, very large companies that are, well traded with massive market caps, in the S&P and, kind of a big part of kind of the public sphere, right? So we forget that these companies grow, and some of them grow really well. And so if we can help them early on and continue to grow with them, that's an exciting journey for us and something that we really found important. And by the way, those companies are now cloud first, right? They're already transformed from an identity perspective, and they're well ahead of their competition, who probably has to go back and figure out how to rationalize, how do we go from on-prem identities to, and all this infrastructure, to figuring out how do we get to the cloud, how do we enable the use of more technology and better technology.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Okay. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit more about that. Let's talk about like identity and identity maturity, right? Like at this point, you've talked to thousands of customers and prospects, right? So
probably tens of thousands to 100,000s, probably.
Okay,
yeah.
there you go. All right,
it's a lot.
So good order of magnitude. So you got a lot of data to talk about. So what is the on-ramp to identity? Where do customers struggle to get going? How do you mature your identity practice? What are the inhibitors to maturing it, both from a technology perspective and also a kind of a process and cultural perspective? Maybe walk us through what you see the maturity like for customers that work with you, and also customers that are both just beginning their journey and are more advanced. So I'm curious to hear your perspective.
Yeah, look, I think maybe I'll take it in a couple of different sectors or ways. One is, if you're sort of, let's say, greenfield, or you're a digital native, you started in the last 5 to 10 years, you clearly have a much easier approach. You can start with modern solutions. You can start with modern approaches. And so that journey is probably a lot more rational, right? Like, they can buy a Jumpcloud, they can put a lot of security around it. There's other tools that you can put around us, and you can kind of rationalize that. So that's probably the easy case, right? Then you've got sort of these companies that maybe we'll take the other end of the spectrum, where they've been around a long time. They've got like deep identity infrastructure, maybe larger companies, and they're really tied to kind of legacy ways of doing things, right? That's a hard journey, right? I mean, this is where the CIOs and CISOs of these companies are pulling their hair out, because they're trying to figure out, like, where do I go from here? Because, I'm really worried, if I make this transformation, what things are going to stop working? What things am I now at risk of, basically from a security perspective and just a productivity or an operational perspective. So that's where, you have to really sort of start to peel the onion. And we talked about this with a lot of our customers and a lot of prospects, and in the market too, is, you're not going to make a wholesale identity transformation where you've got this legacy infrastructure with tens of thousands of people. You're not doing that overnight. Like, you're just not, right? But you are going to say, okay, I know I need to use AI technology. I know I do have to use, get to the cloud with my data centers and get rid of those. And, I know I've got all these legacy applications that I got to shift to cloud. I know I got to use, new technology as much as I can, because I got to be competitive in my space. Well, then you're going to start, taking portions of that, and you're going to start saying, okay, like, how do I peel off portions of this? How do I peel off my, my data center infrastructure, and how do I get control of that from an identity perspective? How do I take all of the in-house applications I have, and how do I, maybe enable them with single sign-on, so that, I can put them behind some security, and make sure that, there's some way for us to give easy access, but make it much more controlled, right? How do I make sure that I don't care what device you use, I'm going to make sure that that login that you have for that device is the core login that you use, and I'm going to, make sure that that's secured. So they start peeling off different portions, and as they start peeling off different portions, then that reduces the load on kind of the legacy infrastructure. And then at some point in time, they say, okay, this is manageable for me, and now I'm going to shift, right? So I think that's the journey, right? Is to say, okay, what's this total scope of the problem? What are the things that are really valuable for me to pick off and control from an identity perspective, a security perspective? I'm going to do those first, and then I'm going to slowly, reduce the footprint, and then I'm going to switch. And we are seeing very large organizations now start to take that approach, because they know the legacy infrastructure approach long term isn't going to, it's not going to be there, right? So they're going to have to figure it out. It's a process, but it's not. They've done this before. They've done data center transformations. They've done, application transformations. They've done all this stuff before. They just got to take that and apply it to identity. A little bit more complicated in some ways, because the tentacles go all over the place, and there's a lot of risk with security. But the same process is still there.
Mm-hmm. What's some of the low-hanging fruit that you see customers go after first, in terms of types of applications, types of business process that they want to go after? Maybe give us an example of the customer who's just kind of taking baby steps versus the customer that's more advanced and is just going full-fledged transformation.
Yeah, I think that the ones that are the easy ones are, we're going to do all the web applications. We're going to get those under control. We're going to do all of our cloud infrastructure. So whether that's with Azure, AWS, GCP, or one of the other hyperscalers, right? Those, we need to have control over that, right? We're going to get control over that. Those are, two pretty simple examples of, how people think about it. And then obviously then you get into some of the harder ones, right? So, if I've got my own legacy applications that I developed in-house, well, that gets a lot harder, right? And so then that's going to take a little bit more work, and people are going to have to figure out, like, how do I do that? Am I going to have some developers write some shims around it so that I can enable them with SAML or OIDC or, one of these single sign-on protocols? Or am I going to sort of shift it, this application, I'm going to shift it to the cloud, and I'm going to transform that application? Well, that's a bigger thing, but people are thinking about doing things like that as well. So I think those are a couple of the ways that people do it. And then there's obviously companies who basically say, you know what, we're all in, we're going to go quicker. So we're going to deprecate Active Directory on-prem, and we're going to shift completely to the cloud, and we're going to make that. And we're now seeing that at scale for large organizations to say, you know what, we know long-term AD is not really the solution that we're going to have. And we want to be more open. We want to be fundamentally agnostic to, whatever technology might come and be able to use it. So we're going to make that wholesale shift. So those are the two ends of the spectrum, right? Like, you pick off different spots that are super important and valuable. Obviously, everybody uses web applications every single day, and that's where a lot of really important data is, and a lot of the important function that we do every day. And then, we're going to transform our whole infrastructure. We're going to enable ourselves to be fully cloud-based.
Okay. Yeah, I think most customers would agree with that. There's all these SaaS apps out there. We just wrote a report on SaaS security posture management, and it's pretty incredible how many SaaS apps are out there. There's probably 10,000 that were created while we were on this podcast as well. So the proliferation of apps is pretty wild.
And that's a really important problem, right? So the problem that we solve around that is, how do I know all the SaaS apps that people have access to, right? So, because there's a lot of SaaS apps that aren't part of your core single sign-on infrastructure. They're not a core part of your identity infrastructure that's corporate sanctioned, right? I just have stuff going on, right? So, we're detecting that, and we're saying, hey, wait a second, there's access going on to, ChatGPT or, one of these other solutions. What do you want to do about it? Do you want to bring it in, which hopefully you do, or do you want to block it? Or, you have some choices there. But absolutely, I think, the problem is, I step back, for me, the lens is all about identity and sort of that security side of it. I look at everything we do as a sort of, you're accessing something, you're doing something. And when you access that something, what happens? Does the organization know about it? Does IT know about it? Is it sanctioned? Is it not sanctioned? Is it secure? Is it behind, a single sign-on portal, which hopefully increases the security? Was there conditional access driven around that, so that, you could make sure that somebody else couldn't get in there very easily? Those are all the questions that come to mind. And I go back to, I think, the foundation of the problem that we're trying to solve is, we're trying to make people productive, but we're trying to do that in a safe, secure manner.
Yep. So let's talk about some of the other hot topics. We just talked about SaaS security posture management. There's data security. Pretty sure most of the security companies that we're talking to all have a plan for building identity into it. Everyone's trying to get a better perspective on how is this attributed to an identity. So I think people have kind of customers have thought, hey, identity is a central point. Now everyone's saying, oh, well, I can buy identity, but I could also buy all these other technology tools that also give me an identity. So how do I think about identity as a tool that connects to these different tools versus all these tools that are trying to sell me on their identity.
Yeah,
right?
no,
Like,
it's a complicated
you need a
space. I mean,
you need a
yeah.
central space to manage that, right?
Yeah, and I think there's some models to think about it with, right? Like, I mean, absolutely, there's going to be a spectrum of all kinds of people dealing with it. I mean, the good news is I think people are realizing that identity or access to things is probably fundamental and is probably the most fundamental thing when we're talking about security. I think that's still not well understood and not well believed yet, but I think we're headed there where people are like, yeah, we have to know everything that somebody has access to, why they have access to that, what level of depth they have access to. That's a fundamental thing that we now need to understand. I think you can break it down into, I've got somebody who's controlling that access. So think of that as a Jumpcloud, right? We are controlling who has access to what. You've also got this sort of new concept around visibility, right? I know everything that somebody has access to. So then you've got, kind of the next stage, which is who actually did something about that, like who actually logged in. So you've got sort of the detection or, logging of that. And then you've got sort of this analysis piece of it. So maybe there's 3 or 4 categories there. And there's going to be providers in each one of those categories, right? So there are going to be people who are going to give you visibility across, stitch together all the different identity things that you have. And, if you're a large scale organization, maybe you got 100,000 people, you're going to have 50, 100 different technologies that deal with identity. And maybe there's a third party vendor who says, I'm going to stitch all that together so that you have full visibility. Then you're going to have people who do analysis, right? We're going to take all the access and we're going to make sure that all the patterns were good. And if there's somebody that did something kind of, nefarious, we'll detect that and we'll tell you about it, right? And then of course you've got the, central point of control, which is we're going to grant that access. We're going to entitle people or not entitle them. I don't think all of those today are one company, right? I mean, you've got lots of different technology. We're trying to play in a bunch of those areas because we think as a data controller, identity controller, you have access to things that other people don't. And that's our value proposition. But there's going to be a lot of players, going to be a lot of innovation. And I think that's good for the industry. I think it's great for customers. They're going to have a lot of choice. Our value proposition is going to be, hey, we're the identity controller. And because of that, we should have a unique position on understanding visibility as well as understanding threat detection or around that space.
What are customers saying if they don't believe in identity as the central place to control things? What are they doing?
Yeah, a totally reasonable approach is to say, I believe the network is where we can control security, right? So we're going to have a layer at the network level, and we're going to control. It is access a little bit, but we're going to control it at the network layer, right? So I don't really care that what goes on the identity side. I'm going to make sure that at the network level, when somebody tries to access something at the network side, I'm going to turn them on or off. I can do my checks. I can make sure they are really who they say they are. So at the network layer, I'm going to do that. And that's a perfectly reasonable approach, right? There's going to be different models, right? I think, we think being at the sort of fundamental identity layer is a little bit stronger, more control. But, I think there's going to be other paths, right? There's also going to be, of course, the device layer, right? So, we're going to control it at the device, right? You have to access something via some sort of hardware thing, right? So if I got you at your device, then, that's another layer of a control point, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's also, of course, going to be somebody at the data level, right? So I'll control access at the data level. I'm not going to give you access to the file or the data points or the database, or you can't query the data in this way or whatever. Like we said, we roll back 45 minutes ago, and we said, there's a problem, right? People want to be able to access things, get work done, and they want to do it safely and securely. Well, the good news is the industry's come up with, 5, 6 different mechanisms to do that, which, hopefully is great for customers, great for the industry. People can pick different paths. And then, I have to compete in the marketplace and say, this is a path that we believe is really powerful and beneficial for people. It may not work for everybody, right? It probably doesn't work for everybody because there's unique circumstances and cases. But, we make the case of why we think identity is the central, kind of control point is really powerful. And then other people make a different case, right?
Yep. Yeah. There's new stuff like enterprise browsers, right? We just did a report on that. That's another way to just stop. It's 2 points about stopping access, right? A lot of the password companies are moving into MDM and extended access, right? So this space is kind of morphing and changing kind of as we speak.
Which is exciting. Hopefully it's great for customers, right? Customers have a lot of choices. Now there's confusion on those choices, and there's, obviously, people are very smart, and there's a lot of great marketing, and there's stories to tell. But, it's our job to kind of say, here's what we think is the core part of this. And, from our perspective, we think identity and that control point is so powerful, so important. And that's the value that we're trying to talk to people about is control it at that layer. Really understand it, entitle people the right way, make sure you're monitoring that, make sure you're detecting that. That's going to be the most important. But again, people have choice, right? Which is wonderful.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about strategy, because strategy drives choice, right? So there's these topics and strategies like zero trust. Maybe talk to us a little bit about how identity plays a role in zero trust. Zero trust is a concept that has been around for a little while, still, again, not well defined because everyone's trying to define it on the vendor side.
So, for sure.
They have different approaches, but tell us a little bit about what zero trust is, how you've seen customers be able to adopt zero trust with identity, and how customers are also kind of down a path and a journey that will never probably end, right? Because it just keeps going. So maybe talk to us a little bit about that, or maybe other strategies you've seen.
No, I think this is such a great question, right? Because I'll talk to you about my belief on zero trust and what it is. I think I translate zero trust into the atomic transaction. Access transaction is the center of zero trust. So when I am trying to access something, the concept of zero trust is what really sort of, happens then. So I have to make sure that the person is really who they say they are. So that's first step in the access transaction. The device that they're on is safe, clean, it's not compromised, right? The network path that I go through is clean, it's not compromised. And then I have the right access rights of the target IT resource that I'm accessing. So whether that's an application, database, whatever it is, I have the right access rights. And then I've got a full transaction of that. I've got that all the steps in that. I've got that all logged, and I have full visibility. To me, that is the atomic unit of zero trust, right? You have taken that access transaction, and you've said, I'm going to make sure those things happen. And if I make sure those things happen, then I'm highly, highly confident that, that's a valid transaction, right? To me, that's the whole ball game, right? So, and the good news is on that, there's different, like we just talked about, there's different parts where everybody can play a role in that. Like there's the identity path, there's the device path, there's a network path, there's the, sort of authentication, authorization side of it, right? And then you've got the logging of all of that. So you've got a lot of different vendors who can, participate in that, which is great. I think what I would really like to see is we all rallied around like, hey, that access transaction, we have a common framework, common language around it. And if we did, then now customers could say, okay, in a zero trust model, I know the atomic unit is when somebody tries to access something. I'm going to make sure that every time that access happens, and on some periodic, kind of intervening time level, we're going to make sure that all that's still valid. That's what zero trust is really going to mean. And then now customers are talking about it in the same way, and hopefully vendors can then talk about it in the same way. And then you can say, here's where I plug in. Here's where I can help here, right? And I don't think there's any one person who's going to cover all of those different pieces, right? Okay. So we can all participate in it, but there's a common framework and common language. So anyway, that's my view. Love to hear your feedback on it, but I think if we could get people to talk about it that way, then it would be really impactful for customers.
Yeah, I think to your point, that's what customers want to understand. They want to understand the broad perspective and then go down. But every vendor is playing a different role and wants to go down that path instead of bubbling it up. So it's kind of, to be honest, the responsibility of companies like ours and yours to up level it, right? So
Yeah, because if we can all say this is what zero trust sort of means from a practical standpoint, and here's where we play. We don't do the whole thing. We play in this part of it, and that's okay, right? And yeah, I mean, that would be great if that's one thing that we can kind of move forward in the industry, is a little bit of common language around what zero trust really is in practice.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're actually working on it. So stay tuned for that. Raj, I know we've been on this for a while, but tell us a little bit about, the things that you're excited about, what you see coming next in identity, maybe some things that are out there, and also maybe some things that aren't out there that you guys are incubating that you can talk about.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think it's an incredibly exciting time to be in identity. So, I think, as I've said a couple times on this podcast, I think people are starting to recognize that identity is central and core to security as well. I don't think that was really common language, common belief, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years ago, for sure. And so that's what I'm excited about, because I'm seeing an explosion of people and technology saying, okay, I do think identity is at the center of the universe. I do think if I can help provide visibility or control or security around it, that's going to be really powerful. That's going to help people. That's going to make sure people don't get compromised. It's going to make sure that, people can do the work that they need to do. They can do it safely, and hopefully they can do it frictionlessly, right? So the easier that we can make identity work for people, I mean, the end user doesn't really want to know the word identity or think about it that way. They just want to get their work done, right? We in the industry talk about it that way, but to me, that's where this is super exciting. So you're going to see solutions around more visibility, more threat detection, more analysis, more security around identity. Like, all of that's happening right now. It's stuff that we're interested in, for sure, and it's the position that we hold in the industry, where we've got many tens of thousands of customers who rely on us as sort of the core identity provider. We're in a unique position, and we're obligated to go, provide them more visibility, provide them more security, to detect threats and things like that. But there's also going to be a lot of third parties out there who are going to find niche opportunities, and they're going to go build great products to solve that. So I think that this is a super exciting space. I would say, if you're an IT leader, if you're a CISO, if you are, an ops leader, I have to believe that this area is going to be near the top of your list. If it's not, it soon will be, because of how powerful it's going to be in, ensuring your organization can stay productive and safe.
Awesome. All right, Raj, thanks for joining the podcast. Appreciate all your insights, and
thanks for having me.
Look forward to chatting.
That was just fun
next time.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks, Ben.
All right, thanks.